And that's what campaigning looks like to me. Or the downside, there's always the upside to it. People hopefully will be presented in council, represented in council, and have our voice for our community. Community changes everything, Koroi. Their vote is their voice.
Yeah, and it's just going back to your experiences, it's hard to hear the things that you're going through as a Pacific man who's come to New Zealand, with my children, with my family, and also hoping for them to have, better futures in Aotearoa and to contribute to the community, so just asking you personally, for yourself and your how was this experience been for you and how are you dealing with that?
Hard. But at the same time, as I said, we can't let this pull us down. We can't let us pull us down. I've got children too. One day they'll probably be in the political, scene where they have to make choices for themselves. Me coming into, when I stand up and talk and debate about things, I actually don't know if that person who sent me that message is sitting right in front of me. And that is a scary thought. But you have to concentrate on the message that's out there, and it's getting that Pacific voice into government, into local government, getting that Pacific point of view into local government, because it's hard.
Yeah, and we've talked about these obstacles. What are some of the highlights so far for you?
Yeah, I've had a lot of support from the non-Pacific Pacific community are really resilient people. This campaign and this standing up for your voice has given them a bit of a growth on what local government looks like. I've also made some really good friends with the other candidates who are in the same show as me, and wanting to know a little bit more about our Pacific perspective and what that looks like and what can I bring into local council. It's really unfortunate that a lot of the things that's happened have come into this campaign, but at the same time, I need to stay positive for our community, for our future, for the future of Pacific and local government.
Landscape redevelopment plans for Aotearoa, the main town on Rarotonga in the Cook Islands, and the tourist magnet Aitutaki have won international awards. The New Zealand company Reset Urban Design drew up plans that aim to specifically address climate change for the Cook Islands Investment Corporation. The International Federation of Landscape Architects praised Te Tau Papa o Aotearoa, the Aotearoa Town Plan, for its climate change mitigation and positive contribution to the wider Cook Islands community. The other prize for Reset Urban Design, working with local architect Romani Katoa, was the first ever spatial plan for Aitutaki called Te Papa Tau o Araora. This plan aims to manage the quality of Aitutaki's environment and local livelihoods. Reset Director Garth Falconer told Don Wiseman they're delighted with the win.
The theme of the awards and the conference was a response to climate crisis, not just climate change. So I believe that the judges have rewarded us for the resourceful way, practical way that we've approached responding to climate crisis and change, and utilising the facilities and the assets and managing to coordinate the community into a supportive force behind the plan.
Give us some examples of the sorts of things you're doing that have climate change in mind.
So climate change is a broad-reaching issue and challenge. So we're looking at wide-ranging responses. Fundamentally, it's an intervention and it's a planning tool. And one of the first challenges was working with the fact that there haven't been any planning initiatives on a wide scale in the Cooks before. And that's due largely to the land tenure set up there being locally or tribally owned, and the Western ideas of creating town plans with zones and restrictions and controls on what you could do on your land haven't flown. So the first thing was to really get people into a situation where they understood the need for the plan, and then The plan is developed through a series of steps and making sure that we're taking the community with us on each of those steps. So we started off with very broad goals in terms of arranging the activities and the roading, the recreation areas where the facilities were, just very broadly, and mainly in a sort of a clustering situation, and trying to get those facilities insulated or removed away from the coastal areas, natural hazards, primarily inundation, storm surge, and then coming out with a short-term development plan that everyone could agree on, and then looking at a longer-term vision plan which had some of the more dramatic or bold moves to address climate change. And in the case of Avarua, the linear layout of the capital city, the township follows the coastal route and is very vulnerable to storm surge. So one of the big moves there for further investigation is an actual extension of the land into a degraded part of the adjacent lagoon to act as a buffer, whilst looking at other strategies to provide alternative transport routes to go away from the coast and putting new facilities, such as new government facilities, planned back inland, so it's protected from that vulnerability.
Now, these plans have actually been in place for a couple of years. What's been the hold-up?
COVID. So both plans for the island of Aitutaki and the capital town, Avarua, were passed by the Parliament in 2020 and were set to move into the next phase. That's largely been affected by the lockdown and the extinguishing of the tourist market, although several smaller projects like the first stages of the Oratanga Harbour in Aitutaki, that's the main sort of port, if you like, that has begun. So it's a long-term plan, it's an ambitious plan, and it's based on firstly educating, gaining consensus, putting a series of stages in, looking for funding, dedicated project management facility and an office to report back and monitor and drive coastal projects. Potentially we're hoping that this award might help attract funding from overseas for the development projects, like Port Vila and Vanuatu was funded by MFAT after the big hurricane, and something like that might be seen as a way for these projects in the Cooks to develop as well. This is not something that we've got a commercial interest in directly. I mean, we've done the plans, the contract's finished, but we really want to see these projects go ahead.
Investment Corporation Chair Mike Henry told on Wiseman the international recognition is very satisfying given the level of local community involvement in developing the plans.
These plans, if we talk about the Aitutaki Island plans, for example, these are plans that have been, they're sort of developments of long-standing general of the wider community, and for the first time putting them down on paper and then getting, with wide consultation, a buy-in from everybody to say, is this the direction we're looking to develop, and is this the sort of sustainable things that we would like to see in our future? And this plan has been about getting it down on paper and ensuring that, yes, the wider community is largely in line with this is the direction we'd like to go.
If we stay with Aitutaki, how much is the landscape going to change when it's remodeled?
I think it's not so much how much is the landscape going to change, it's the sort of how we're better going to utilise the natural resources that are there or protect the ones that already exist. As an example, in the development of the waterfront where the ports are, modelling was done by SOPAC to ensure that whatever happens would have no detrimental effects, so that you don't increase ocean currents, you don't take away any habitat that may be needed for some of our marine life. And then as we do things like that, we discover from our community, we have a marae in this area on the water, which in the Cook Islands is not common. In fact, in this part of the Pacific, I only know of the ones in Huahine in French Polynesia. So we've discovered these, we've incorporated them into the plan, we've made sure that as we develop, we're going to preserve and protect and bring those to the forefront of part of the development.
How important is sustainability within this plan?
Very important. We live on an island. If we don't protect the very small and fragile environment we don't have anywhere to live. So ensuring that the steps we take are sustainable it's part and parcel of Polynesia. It's where Polynesians have been able to survive on very small pieces of land with not many resources and survive very well for over 1,000 years. And this is just taking it that one step further and incorporating it into what is now a modern Polynesian society. The government are supportive and have been from the beginning of the development of this plan. It's a living document, So the plans evolve as the needs of the community evolves and as funds come available to do the different steps. Many of the steps around climate protection and climate adaptation require funding, and small Pacific islands like Cook Islands, we're not the ones that have caused the climate change that we're experiencing. We're at the end of the line, and so we're looking to the Green Climate Fund and some of the bigger funds that are out there to help us make the adaptation that we need to continue to live.
Well, I think so. For listening, that brings us to the end of Pacific Waves for today. Remember, you can download a speaker device from Spotify, iHeart, or Apple Podcasts, and if you use an app, it's amazing so others can also find us. Manu. Hello through and welcome everyone to the Melanesia Update. Nikoroy Hawkins. Our program today by me look for sample of a big fella stories around the region. Behind by Nicolo Kimio Bug FM, Vanuatu. And the Pacific News Pigeon, Nikoroy Hawkins. Police Terror for family death for a 7-year-old boy after being shooting him with a gun. Police also reporting that shooting him is on residence of Boyala village below Haateo. The main island of Tapu last Friday evening local time. Tadi this boy had been arrested, but police would say victim him died after and he fired 4 shots time of play with him. This firearm. Police say fireman he went for a .22 rifle with him unlicensed ammunition. One for a human rights advocacy group, Hemi urging immigration New Zealand to must changing policy and legislation. Where he say he saw more clear pattern of discrimination against Pacific people with disabilities. International Center for Advocates Against Discrimination within Disability Rights Organization, Association to Value within Federal Climate Action Network, have been compiling one for a shadow report law this for issue. Have been submitting the UN Committee on Rights Protection within Disabilities. I had law review Blahem Law New Zealand. One for researcher Erin Thomas, and he said that evidence that decisions were being made by Immigration New Zealand have not been made fairly. The Pacific have been putting in request for comment from Immigration New Zealand through Law MB, Law this for a story. At response, no been come through yet. Chief Ombudsman Law New Zealand, Mr. Boshia, Boshia, one for Vice President to International Ombudsman Institute, tell local media that local Pacific Ombudsman cladding one for fine line between doing what right thing by people and no get offside within what the government say try for taking fairness from government agencies and difficult. So Ombudsman himself help for navigating, making people taking answers for problems blockade. While Osamo by providing support for Office for Ombudsman for current basic investigations training for Ombudsman liaison officers for public agencies. Peter Boshia has been Chief Ombudsman for New Zealand since 2015 and he will now someone Matai title Blow Misa from Falelatai where he been bestowed law year 2000. Solomon Islands opposition MP Derek Manwari he say government using Pacific Games as some excuse for extending normal life in the parliament. For an interview recently for MP Blow Speaker he say Solomon Islands say hosting both Pacific Games and National General Elections Namara 2023. Mr. Manwari say argument that logistics and finance have been in place for hosting two major events this year. One for excuse where have been happen this time. We say Solomon lobby law 2016 for hosting Pacific Games and also they finished no time yet that elections by happen the same year. And we say fellow members for parliament from government will plan for vote in favor of amendment or should seriously consider whether reasons for hosting games can be more important than national elections. Games will be set for start law November 2023. American Samoa Department of Homeland Security reach out for population after emergency exercise test. Exercise happened labor holiday territory and involving emergency services but not general public. Israel and of numerous earthquakes have been reported Manua since July 26 due to Tau Island underwater volcano. Homeland Security Director Samana Semo there And he said that I'd been using emergency services staff for Medicaid members for population during this exercise. Samoa Island Samai hemi by taking center stage year-long celebration 60 years for independence where we move for shores plan first ever official flag raising ceremony island and this week Don Bosco Technical Institute grounds Sale Lulonga. Joining now head of state and member of the Council of Deputies and the Governor General of New Zealand Dame Cindy Kiro. Members of cabinet, parliamentarians, government heads of ministries and invited dignitaries to attend. To address Blahem, Prime Minister Fiame Naomi Mataafa, and he said that in keeping with the first ever flag raising ceremony Samai cabinet decide for middle there for first time too. This one one for a new beginning and move for in the future. We acknowledge sacrifices but forefathers Samoa had been laying foundation for independence for country from New Zealand 1962. 2 days after deadly stabbing spree Canadian province Saskatchewan have been hard yet for find him now surviving killer where he remain at large. Brothers Miles and Damien Sanderson have been gone the run after stabbing James Smith Cree Nation Reserve Saskatchewan province. Damien Sanderson he found dead Monday but brother blame him is still subject to one for a massive manhunt. He might injure himself and he considered armed and dangerous. Stabbings reserve and nearby town Weldon and leaving 10 fellow people dead and 18 fellow wounded. Los sports 24 fellow representatives from rugby unions across the Pacific are attending one 5-day development event Fiji. And the first opportunity since COVID-19 impacting World 2020 where summit there at Bin Holem. This week can bring national development managers together for collaborate and discussing best practice. Time region emerge from pandemic. Each rugby union developing or updating now targets including women's rugby pathways within player welfare initiatives. I'm now news and sports pigeon from RNZ Pacific. And I'm now some from Okata top stories here today from RNZ Pacific. This time they join him now team from Buzz FM Vanuatu.
Vanuatu Nightly News.
In tonight's headlines, the LTA reinforcing dressing code. VNPF owns UNALCO's majority shares. 54 suicide deaths recorded in Vanuatu and Central School to open 20 million Vanuatu building next year. Good evening and welcome to Vanuatu 19 News. I'm Kizi Kansakau. Leading on news tonight, 80 million Vanuatu approved for living allowances for mayors. The board of VNPF has this week approved 80 million Vanuatu for Vanuatu students under MES scheme to apply as loan to meet their needs while studying abroad. Lately, VNPF has been criticized for such scheme, which created confusion among students under the program. VNPF General Manager Pamada Shari explaining how the scheme came into effect under different partisans.
MES was started in 2020, but we signed the MOU with the former Minister for Education and MOU where VNPF would pay the MOU was particularly between VNPF and the government. VNPF would pay for the tuition and accommodation while government take care of the living expenses and pocket money. So in 2021, there was an investigation carried out by Ombudsman. Ombudsman declared that government cannot sign the MOU without approval of the Council of Ministers. So within that time, we decided that we will have a separate scheme for VNPF, only VNPF. So in 2022, around middle of 2022, the government decided not to pay any allowance to the students who were still under MES scheme.
Ashari says one of the approved decisions is for students to apply for living allowances. In the past, the Scholarship Office, through the Ministry of Education, has been paying 38,000 Vanuatu plus an extra 20,000 Vanuatu monthly to students under the program. But this came to end mid of this year, when Ministry of Education decided to cease paying for allowances.
The board approved the following. One, the students who are on BNPF scheme, who are continuing under MES, will be able to apply directly to BNPF for a loan to cover their living expense. The maximum we will be giving is 38,000 per month. There will be no pocket money. Parents will have to look after them. So the board has approved 80 million for VNPF for this year to pay if they need living allowance. But this is not allowance. This is living expenses. We will give it and you have to repay. The money belongs to your parents. We don't want your parents to retire without any money. We want you are supported by the parents, so at the end of the day, you must look after your parents and also repay all the loans which your parents have used. So this is simply a relationship between BNPF and the members.
General Manager Pamad Asari on public transport, the Vanuatu Police Force Traffic Unit said that all public service drivers caught wearing T-shirts, round neck, short pants, slippers, or have beards or hair not properly groomed will be fined 10,000 Vatu. This came to light after Chief Executive Officer of the Public Land Transport Authority, Regional Tabijarian, confirms that since July, 37 drivers have been fined for not adhering to the dress code of a public service driver. Tabijarian says his office has collected more than 300,000 Vatu for those infringements. On VNPF has purchased a two-flat office building at over 100 million Vatu to accommodate the Vanuatu's General Consulate in Numea back in 2020. This house from Vanuatu was the first embassy building outside Vanuatu to be owned by Vanuatu in overseas. The General Manager of VNPF, Ashari, just returned from a trip to New Caledonia to get latest status on the property, and he says he has already talked with OGCIO about setting up a government IT network in the office before the consulate and other agencies can start occupying it. It says that the building also requires a small upgrade. OGCIO officer will travel to Numea this week, according to Ashari.
OGCIO is leaving New Caledonia on Friday or Saturday, and next week he will work on it and will ensure that everything is done. So after that, once it's done, we will make another trip and get OGCIO or the consulate to move into the bottom floor. The good news is that the top floor is also being occupied and will be occupied by one of the government departments from the government of New Caledonia. We'll disclose all this once we sign the agreement.
The consulate was expected to move into the building before the country's independence anniversary in mid of 2020. General Manager Pamad Ashari says the General Consulate was unable to move into the building due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Ashari says the property is a good investment as BNPF is expecting around 600,000 Vatu in rent per month from the property once it's fully occupied. Currently, the government continues to pay rent to BNPF.
600,000 a month, which will be about 7.2 million a year, so which is really good return for us. With this is our first small one, and it is successful. Now we're moving to Fiji.
BNPF is now focusing on applying these models for the Vanuatu High Commission in Fiji. General Manager Ashari says a team is developing a building concept for the Vanuatu High Commission in Suva to be presented to the board.
During the last visit, Minister for Finance confirmed that he will arrange with BNPF to do the funding for that High Commission office. So we are now planning to organize it. The board has mandated me to work with the Foreign Affairs, get a concept and organize building and managing of that property. So we are on the verge of getting this expression of interest out for Fiji. Wellington for next year. We we will be hoping, we want Fiji to be out this year, started this year, so next year we are left with Canberra and Wellington.
The MPF General Manager Pamod Ashari in health. This week, the Ministry of Health's mental health team is conducting suicide prevention awareness in certain schools and communities in Sanma province to commemorate World Suicide Prevention Day, which is commemorated on September 10th every year. According to a statement from the Ministry of Health, Vanuatu recently recorded increased number of deaths in the past years related to self-harm and suicide. According to WHO report in 2020, 54 suicide deaths recorded in Vanuatu, which means of all deaths, 2.70% is caused by self-harm and suicide. The age-adjusted death rate is 20.97 per 100,000 and population ranks Vanuatu 13 in the world. Mental health team visit and raise awareness in schools including Santo East, Tata Secondary, Hokaba Secondary, Manduitu Secondary, Medieval College and Lycée de Luganville and the respective communities. This year is the first ever event that Team Mental Health will be hosting to commemorate the day. On electricity, the board of the Vanuatu National Provident Fund, VNPF, has endorsed for VNPF to purchase an additional 26% shares in Unelco Angie, the supplier of electricity on a party. VNPF General Manager Pamod Ashari says this additional 26% shares will boost VNPF's shares from 49 to 75%, making VNPF the major shareholder in Unelco Angie. Ashari says these should be realized end of this year. Says it would cost VNPF around 1 billion Vatu to purchase the shares under the current valuation. VNPF established shareholder agreement with UNALCO back in 2015. VNPF has been receiving dividends from UNALCO Angie annually from its shares. Ashari says increasing the shares to 75% will boost dividends. VNPF increased its shares from 40% to 49% in 2020. The fund purchased the shares of over 300 million Vatu. For last year's financial year, VNPF collected 180 million Vatu in dividend from Unelco Angie. VNPF received almost 100 million Vatu dividend at the end of 2019 after boosting its shares from 14.40 to 40% in 2018. VNPF was paid 29,807,000 Vatu based on its 14.4% participation in May 2018. In 2017, it received a dividend of over 30 million Vatu and almost 40 million Vatu for the year before. Ashari conveyed that VNPF is also in the process of finalizing the molecular antenna concession. VNPF is the new electricity concessionaire on molecular antenna. It will be partnering with UNALCO and Vate Electrics to provide electricity on the two islands. UNALCO will be responsible for the component of electricity generation, while Vate Electrics will have the responsibility of distributing the electricity. Ashari says a team is finalizing the tariff and other important tasks. Relevant arrangements are being done and should be completed before end of September. And to end, in education, Central School has invested 20 million Vatu in the construction of a new building for its effective students to be open next year. The school has 7 elective classes. 4 of these classes have no classroom since 2012 and have been using the school hall and Natangura Hat, according to Principal George Willitian. Smaller than a normal classroom, elective blocks cater for small class sizes. 25 students will be accommodated in each of the 6 rooms in the new elective block. Willitian says these elective blocks are completely funded by the school. Funds for this project came from fundraisers like the music night events, walkathon and business financial management. Will that conclude our Vanuatu Nightly News? You can still follow VNN through Buzz FM SoundCloud, Buzz FM Facebook page, our website www.buzzfm.du or on Radio New Zealand Malaysian Update RNZ Pacific. I'm Kizzy Kalsakau. A very good night.
And that was the Roti News.
now Melanesian update program ni Koroy Hawkins. Thank you to Maso Tunin Kam. Bisa Kasim Okata up-to-date news and current affairs on website kami follow rnzi.com and we follow staff tool on Facebook and on Twitter to search him at RNZ Pacific. Pacific News at Marie Kososana Suzuki Timing. Chairman Ireland's Prime Minister Melissa Sotaveri is trying to fast-track a constitutional amendment bill through Parliament, which if passed will dissolve Parliament and delay elections until next year. Mr. Sotaveri says deferring the elections will alleviate strain on the government as it prepares to host the 2023 Pacific Games. Victoria University political science professor John Frankel predicts widespread public discontent if the bill is passed.
The South Pacific Games is of secondary importance compared to the general election. People in the Solomons only get a chance to change their governments every 4 years, and they cherish that opportunity. And it's frowned upon to have a Prime Minister seek to extend his stay in office. Do people really believe this is about the South Pacific Games, or is this, in fact, simply an authoritarian manoeuvre?
The final reading of the bill is expected today, September the 8th, local time. In Vanuatu, over 300,000 registered voters will go to the polls for a snap election on October the 13th. This was triggered by dissolution of the country's parliament on August 19th by the president's Nika Wurabaravu on the eve of a motion of no confidence against the now caretaker Prime Minister Bob Loughman. The Vanuatu Electoral Commission announced the official snap election timeline on Wednesday local time in Port Vila. According to the timeline, candidate nominations will open on September the 12th and close on the 21st. Samoa is set to sign 2 air services agreements with 2 international airlines before the end of the year. Samoa Observer reports this was revealed by the Minister of Civil Aviation, who said he will be flying to Singapore later this month to seal the deal with Singapore Airlines and will also line up to sign a similar deal with United Arab Emirates. Olofiti Afova'ai said this does not mean that they'll be issued foreign operating certificates for these 2 airlines, but the minister did not rule out the government operating an international airline in the future. The Tongan Prime Minister says 70% of houses needed for victims of the January 15 volcano and tsunami events have been procured, with construction already underway. Siausi Sovaleni says construction is well underway on 24 houses in Masilamea for the people of Atata, and they hope to complete those houses by the end of this month. By construction work is also set to start soon, with plans to complete the houses before Christmas. Meanwhile, Tonga has approved a waiver for overstay fees after requests from overseas communities in the kingdom who have cited visa issues. The waiver was proposed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and covers all overseas citizens who have been overstaying in Tonga before and during the COVID-19 lockdown. The waiver will start on September 12th and run until December 12th. All those applying for the waiver have to register with the Tonga Immigration Department. Landscape redevelopment plans for Avarua, the main town of Rarotonga in the Cook Islands and the island of Aitutaki, had won international awards. New Zealand company Reset Urban Design drew up plans that aim to specifically address climate change for the Cook Islands Investment Corporation. The chair of the Reset Urban Design, Garth Falconer, says he thinks they won because of the practical approach they took.
So we started off with very broad goals in terms of arranging the activities and roading, recreation areas where the facilities were, just very broadly, and mainly in a sort of a clustering situation, and trying to get those facilities insulated or removed away from the coastal areas which are prone to natural hazard.
Back to Vanuatu, where 50 government-registered vehicles have been confiscated by the Police Traffic Department due to road unreadiness. The Daily Post newspaper reports it's the first police operation of its kind, and meted vehicles driven by government ministers, Director Generals, department directors, and some police officers. The report says the vehicles did not comply with traffic regulations. Under regulation, all government vehicles need to pass a road readiness check every year. All departments concerned will be fined, while the Public Service Commission has called on them to comply with all the road traffic regulations from now on. In New Zealand, a Pasifika candidate for Palmerston North City Council, Ria Tauni, is urging her fellow candidates to stand fast in confronting racism on the election trail. A survey of 105 anonymous responses presented at this year's local body conference in Palmerston North showed nearly half of councillors had experienced racism, gender discrimination or other forms of harassment. Ms. Tauni says she's not surprised by the findings based on her own experience of abuse, but it isn't right.
So I've had a lot of messages telling me to get off my ethnic buzz, just being really uncomfortable with a Pacific woman coming into election. I've had some really uncomfortable messages from men who borderline sexual harassment, and it's not a very nice experience, especially if you're a new candidate coming into the local election. People say that, this is what to be expected, but it's not normal.
Meanwhile, COVID-19 infection rates for Pasifika people in New Zealand are dropping significantly, with the community reporting fewer than 2,000 cases every week. The University of Auckland's Pacific Health Research Fellow, Dr. Siobhan Tuakoi, says the efforts between Pacific leaders, health providers, community groups and churches to get 90% of the Pasifika population vaccinated is paying off. Dr. Tuakoi says it's pleasing to see COVID case numbers for Pasifika declining.
Through the massive turnouts for the vaccination drives and us reaching that 90% target before the end of 2021. And that's gone a long way in protecting us, and so we're seeing Pacific people make up less than 2,000 cases each week, and that number is continuing to decrease.
While it's positive to see the numbers for Pacific peoples with COVID has reduced, Dr. Tuakoi says there's no reliable data to determine how many in the community are affected by long COVID. In more health news, the New Zealand Foreign Minister has announced increased support for sexual and reproductive health in the Pacific. Nanaia Mahuta says Aotearoa New Zealand already works closely with sexual and reproductive health services throughout the region, but much more needs to be done. She announced additional aid of $18.2 million over 5 years for agencies working across the Pacific to improve care and access in the sector. In world news, Britain's new Prime Minister Liz Truss and Labour's Sir Keir Starmer have clashed over how to help people pay their energy bills at Truss's first Prime Minister's questions. Ms Truss has pledged to cut taxes, but Sir Keir says that must include a windfall tax on energy companies. The BBC's Rob Watson has more.
Is the government going to be, as Liz Truss campaign for it to be, which is something pretty radical and right-wing, a sort of Trussonomics, the idea of tax cuts, a smaller state, deregulation. I mean, certainly if you look at those that she's appointed around her, and of course people have picked out the issue of diversity and gender, but actually the closest people to her share that sort of very much right-of-centre agenda, or will in the end the sort of, the kind of orthodoxies of how governments deal with tax and spending and the nation's finances, or will they kick in?
To sport, French rugby star Virimi Vakatawa has announced his retirement after revealing a serious cardiac condition. The 30-year-old Fijian national has represented France since 2016, scoring 10 tries in 31 international appearances. The club's coach and French rugby legend Fabien Galtier told a press conference in Paris, Vakatawa is one of the greatest players to ever represent France.
I am emotional. With great sadness, I announce Virimi has played his last 3 matches with the French team. When we picked up the team, he was a key player to our game and story. He was exceptional. Il a été formidable.
And finally, the American football season kicks off this Friday local time in Los Angeles, with the Los Angeles Rams taking on the Buffalo Bills. Both teams are highly ranked and enter the season with high expectations from fans. The Rams are the defending Super Bowl champions. Star quarterback Matthew Stafford leads the Rams for his third season. And that is your RNZ Pacific News and Sport. To read or to listen to more of our stories online, head over to rnzi.com.
This is RNZ Pacific. We now join the ABC's One Talk program for our listeners in Melanesia.
Government Pacific, Isla and ABC Radio Australia. Long FM, long mobile phone, and live streaming. Long abc.net.au/Radio Australia.
Hello again, Rayuna. Welcome along this half hour long news now, current affairs broadcast along ABC Radio Australia One Talk program. Today, Twin number 7 long moon September. Wantamiugan mi Sam Seke. All story long current affairs. Opposition long Solomon Islands I Paul long wai na gaman no accept him offer long Australia long give him money long run him national election long 2023. Bayi mi harim sampla update long Sidan long all people long Manam Volcano Island long Papua New Guinea. Na big Platuna company long Solomon Islands I walk along